The van that called to him for 30 years? The legend of the two missing girls had remained one of Rockford's greatest mysteries. 10-year-old cousins Melody Carter and Tasha Simmons had vanished on a warm July evening in 1991 while walking home from a county fair. Their families were devastated, and the town was shaken to its core. Despite relentless searches, police investigations, and years of speculation, no sign of them was ever found. Over time, the case faded into local folklore, an unsolved tragedy whispered about in late-night diner conversations and haunted by cold case detectives who could never close the file. But for Henry Dawson, a retired auto mechanic with an obsession for restoring old vehicles, the case had never crossed his mind until he saw the van. Henry had spent most of his life in Rockford. He had grown up working in his father's auto shop and had made a name for himself fixing up old, forgotten cars, breathing new life into them. He had always found beauty in the neglected, the rusted out, and the discarded. It was why he was at Floyd's salvage yard that afternoon, searching for his next project. The salvage yard sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling graveyard of abandoned cars, trucks, and motorcycles, their metal shells rusting under the Alabama sun, weeds pushed up through cracked pavement, and the smell of oil and decay hung thick in the air. Henry walked through the rows of battered vehicles, dragging his fingers along dusty hoods, looking for something that felt right. That was how it always worked for him. He didn't choose the cars, they chose him. And then he saw it. A 1985 Chevy van, its blue paint dull to a ghostly gray with time and neglect. It sat at the far end of the lot, half buried in weeds, like it had been deliberately hidden away. The moment Henry laid eyes on it, an odd feeling settled over him, an unshakable sense of déjà vu, as if the van had been waiting for him. Something about it didn't make sense. Why was it here? Unlike the other wrecks, this van wasn't stripped for parts. It hadn't been dismantled or gutted for scrap. It was just left there. "Hey, Floyd," Henry called out. "What's the deal with this one?" Floyd, the yard's owner, limped over, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He was an old man with leathery skin and a permanent scowl. "That old thing," Floyd muttered, eyeing the van like it had personally offended him. "Been sitting here for years. My brother Rye used to own it." Henry turned to him. "Rye? Thought he died in." "That house fire way back?" Floyd's face darkened. "He did 95. He sniffed. After he passed, I just kept the van. Never really thought about it much." Henry ran his fingers along the van's surface. The windows were grimy, clouded with years of dirt and dust. He tugged on the handle, locked. "You looking to sell it?" Henry asked. Floyd hesitated. "Hell, I guess. Ain't worth much. You want to haul it out of here? It's yours for $500. Henry considered it. Something about the van gnawed him, like an itch in the back of his mind. $500 was a steal for a full-bodied Chevy, even one in rough shape. "Deal," he said. He didn't know it yet, but that decision would change everything. The van's secrets. That night, Henry towed the van to his workshop, a small, cluttered garage on the edge of town where he spent most of his days restoring old cars. The moment he pulled it inside and shut the garage doors, the air around him felt different. He grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the dusty windows. The inside was eerily intact. Dusty seats, old fast food wrappers, an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror long since dried up. It looked as if someone had just stepped out of it years ago and never came back. He reached for the passenger door and gave it a firm tug. The handle resisted. At first, but with a groan of rusted metal, it popped open. The smell hit him first. Stale air mixed with something else, something wrong. A faint musty odor that sent a shiver down his spine. Henry climbed inside, brushing away cobwebs as he moved toward the back. The seats were ripped, stuffing poking through the vinyl. He ran his hand over the metal walls, feeling for anything unusual. Then, near the back panel, his fingers brushed against something, a deep scratch. Frowning, he pulled out his pocket knife and scraped away the grime-covered surface. The more he wiped, the more the scratch revealed itself. Letters at first. They were faint, barely legible. But as Henry cleared more dust, his stomach tightened. Heel. P-U-S? Me. And T? Ha. 1991. His breath caught in his throat. His mind raced. Melody and Tasha, the missing girls. His hands trembled as he traced the letters. This was connected to them. He scrambled for his phone, snapping pictures, trying to process what he had just found. Had they been inside this van? Had this been where they spent their last moments? A shiver ran down his spine. And then he saw something else. Near the floorboard, tucked beneath a layer of torn carpet, was something metallic. He pried it loose, and when he held it up to the dim garage light, his stomach lurched. A rusted chain. Shackles. Henry stumbled back, his breathing ragged. This wasn't just an abandoned van. It was a crime scene. A wave of nausea rolled through him as he realized what he had just uncovered. For 30 years, people had wondered what happened to those girls, and now he might have just found the answer. But something told him this was only the beginning. The ghosts of the van. Henry sat in the dim glow of his garage, staring at the rusted chain in his trembling hands. His pulse pounded in his ears. For 30 years, Rockford had whispered about Melody and Tashad's disappearance. People had theories. Some thought they were taken by a drifter. Others believed they ran away. But the truth had always been out of reach, until now. Henry's fingers traced the rusted metal. The shackles were small, too small, designed for a child. His stomach twisted at the thought. He forced himself to look away and turned his attention back to the van. He had to be sure. He had to know what else it was hiding. The hidden compartment. Henry grabbed his flashlight and slid underneath the van, inspecting every inch of its frame. His fingers ran along the undercarriage, feeling for anything unusual. Then he found it, a panel. It was bolted into place, but the edges were misaligned, like someone had removed it before. Henry's heart hammered. He grabbed his toolbox, loosened the rusted bolts, and pried the panel open. Inside, there was something wrapped in plastic. His breath caught in his throat as he pulled it free. His fingers fumbled to peel back the brittle plastic, revealing its contents. A faded purple backpack. It was old and caked in dust, but the moment Henry saw it, a memory clicked. Melody Carter had been wearing a purple backpack the day she disappeared. Henry's hands shook as he unzipped it. Inside were a few items untouched by time. A small notebook, its pages yellowed but still legible. A bracelet woven with tiny plastic beads that spelled T and Mio. And at the very bottom, a child's drawing. Crude stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Henry's vision blurred. This was real. This wasn't just some old van. It was part of their story. A story that had never been told. A visit to the sheriff. Henry knew he couldn't sit on this. He needed to take everything to the police. Sheriff Dale Holloway had been a young deputy when Melody and Tashad disappeared. Now he was an old, weary man, and having spent the last 3 decades haunted by the case that had never been solved, when Henry walked into the station, the sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What brings you here, Dawson?" Henry hesitated, then placed the bracelet, the notebook, and the chain on Holloway's desk. "I found these," he said quietly. Holloway's face hardened. "Where?" "In an old van," Henry replied, "at Floyd's salvage yard." The sheriff's fingers hovered over the items. His expression shifted like a memory had just resurfaced. "Whose van?" Henry hesitated. Floyd's brother Ray. Something flickered across Holloway's face, something dark. The room felt suddenly smaller, the silence heavy. The sheriff exhaled and leaned back in his chair. "Ray Patterson," he muttered. "You remember him?" Andrea asked. Holloway nodded slowly. "Yeah, I remember him." Henry waited. "Ray was a drifter," Holloway continued. "Worked odd jobs, had a reputation for being strange, kept to himself. People always said there was something off about him." He frowned. "But we never had reason to suspect him in the girl's disappearance." Henry swallowed. "What if we were wrong?" The sheriff stared at the items on his desk. He picked up the notebook and flipped through its pages, stopping at one in particular. Henry watched as the sheriff's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the paper a little too hard. Henry leaned in. "What does it say?" Holloway hesitated, then turned the notebook around. On the page, scrawled in a child's shaky handwriting, were 4 words. "He won't let us go." Henry felt his blood run cold. For 30 years, the town had been looking for an answer, and now it had found them. But the scariest part? The answer had been right in front of them the whole time. The fire that hid the truth that night. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. The van, the shackles, the notebook, it all swirled in his mind. He pulled out his laptop and started digging. If Ray Patterson had something to do with the girl's disappearance, there had to be more. He searched old newspaper archives, digging up anything he could find on Ray. And then he found the fire. In 1995, 4 years after Melody and Tasha vanished, Ray Patterson's house had burned to the ground. The official report ruled it as an accident, but something about it felt off. The fire had been so intense that almost nothing was recovered, including Ray's body. Henry's stomach twisted. He pulled up another article. According to the report, a neighbor claimed to have seen someone fleeing the scene before the fire started, but the police never found any suspects. Henry sat back in his chair, heart pounding. What if? Died. What if someone had made sure he disappeared? The unfinished business. The next morning, Henry drove back to Floyd's salvage yard. He had one last question. Floyd was in his usual spot, sipping a beer outside his trailer. Henry stepped out of his truck and walked straight up to him. "Tell me the truth, Floyd," he said. "Did you know what your brother was doing?" Floyd's face darkened. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then finally he muttered, "Ray was always a sick son of a bee." He took a swig of beer. "But I never knew about the girls, I swear." Henry studied him. Floyd wasn't telling the whole truth. But before he could press him further, Floyd said something that froze Henry in place. "You know what's funny?" Floyd chuckled bitterly. "Right before he died, Ray told me something. Said that if he ever went missing, it wouldn't be by accident." Henry's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Floyd smirked, said he wasn't scared of the cops, wasn't scared of going to prison. His eyes locked onto Henry's. Said the only thing that scared him was her. Henry's stomach dropped. "Who?" he whispered. Floyd took another sip of beer. "Melody's mama." The words hit Henry like a train, because Melody's mother, Janice Carter, had died years ago, or at least that's what everyone believed. But now Henry wasn't so sure. And as he stood there in the salvage yard, staring at the rusted van that had brought all of this back to life, one thing became painfully clear. This mystery wasn't over. It had only just begun. The woman who never left. Henry sat in his truck outside Janice Carter's old house, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. It was a small, weathered home on the outskirts of Rockford, long abandoned after her supposed death. The porch sagged, the shutters hung loose, and ivy crawled up the sides, reclaiming what had been left behind. But Henry couldn't shake Floyd's words. The only thing that scared Rye was her. Janice had lost her daughter Melody to thin air 30 years ago. She had fought harder than anyone to bring her home. She had haunted the police station, begged for search teams, and even started a one-woman investigation when the town had given up. And then one day, she was gone too. A car accident, they said. Henry had never thought much about it before, until now. Because what if Janice Carter never died at all? What if she had disappeared on purpose? A house full of secrets. Henry took a deep breath, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out. Of his truck, the front door was locked, but the window beside it had been smashed in. Years ago, he reached through, unlatched it, and climbed inside. Dust coated everything, faded. Missing person flyers of Melody and Tashia were still taped to the walls, the faces barely visible. Stacks of newspapers lay scattered across the floor, the headlines all the same. 2 Gs vanish, no leads. SAR HT Aldi Fuff after 6 montages, Rocky Ford's darkest murmur. Of Henry's chest tightened, Janice never let go. Then he saw the desk. Papers were still piled high, untouched by time. Notes, timelines, maps, scribbled messages in red ink, circled key locations, and right in the center of it all was a name, underlined, written over and over. Ray. Henry's stomach twisted. Janice had suspected him all along. He flipped through the papers, searching for anything new, when something caught his eye. A police report. It was old and faded, but the date stood out. September 12, 1991, the night Melody and Tashia disappeared. Henry read it carefully. It was a call record from someone who had reported a man carrying something wrapped in a blanket near the old mill road. The responding officer, Dale Holloway. Henry's pulse spiked. Sheriff Holloway had never mentioned this before. And even stranger, the case file was stamped closed just 2 days later. What the hell was going on? The sheriff's omission? Henry stormed into the sheriff's office, the police report clutched in his fist. Holloway looked up, surprised. Something wrong? Henry slammed the report down. You tell me. Holloway's face froze. Where did you get this? He asked. Henry didn't answer. You were called the night the girls disappeared. Someone saw a man carrying something wrapped in a blanket. He took a step closer, and you buried it. Holloway sighed, rubbing his temples. Henry, there's things you don't understand. Then explain them, Henry snapped. The sheriff hesitated, then slowly leaned back in his chair. I didn't bury it. Someone else did. Henry narrowed his eyes. Who? Holloway's face was unreadable. Back then, the chief of police was Warren Pritchard, Holloway said. He was an old-school, keep-the-town-clean kind of man. He didn't like the idea of Rockford being known for a child abduction, said it would ruin the town's reputation. Henry's fists clenched, so he covered it up. Holloway nodded grimly. I tried to fight it. I was young, thought I could change things. But Pritchard wasn't the type to argue with. He ordered me to close the case, burn the files, and when I refused, his gaze darkened my house. My wife got threatening phone calls. I had a 6-month-old daughter at the time. Henry Holloway's voice dropped. So, yeah, I backed off. Henry exhaled, trying to process, and Ray Patterson Holloway rubbed his jaw. Rye wasn't working alone, we knew that much, but once the case was shut down, there was nothing we could do. Henry's blood ran cold. If Rye wasn't alone, he said slowly, then who was helping him? Holloway hesitated. Then he uttered a name Henry never expected. Warren Pritchard. Henry, the former chief of police, the same man who had covered everything up. Before Henry could respond, a knock sounded on the office door. A young deputy poked his head in. "Sheriff, you might want to see this." Holloway and Henry exchanged a look before following the deputy outside. A small crowd had gathered in front of the station, and standing in the middle of them was an old woman. Her face was weathered, her hair streaked with gray, but Henry recognized her instantly. His breath caught in his throat. Janice Carter! She wasn't dead, and from the look in her eyes, she was done hiding. A reckoning 30 years in the making. Janice stood tall, gripping a manila folder in one hand and a rusted key in the other. "Sheriff Holloway," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I think it's time we talk." Henry could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on the entire town. For 30 years, Rockford had forgotten her, ignored her, but Janice Carter had never forgotten them. She turned her gaze to Henry. "You found the van, didn't you?" Henry nodded slowly. Janice exhaled. "Then, it's time you see what I found." She opened the folder, revealing a set of photographs. Aged, faded, but unmistakable. Henry felt his stomach drop. The photos showed two girls, Melody and Tasha, sitting in a dark room, eyes hollow, faces scared, but alive. And standing behind them was Ray Patterson, and next to him, a man in a police uniform. Henry's breath caught because the badge number on the uniform, it belonged to Warren Pitchard, the town's beloved police chief. Had been one of their captors? Varied truths. A hush fell over the crowd as Janice Carter clutched the old photographs in her trembling hands. The image was burned into Henry's mind. Melody and Tasha alive, but terrified, trapped in some unknown place. And standing behind them, Ray Patterson and Warren Pitchard, the beloved former chief of police, the man who had supposedly protected this town. Henry's pulse thundered. Janice wasn't lying. She had never stopped looking for the truth. And now, after 3 decades, she had finally dragged it into the light. But what else had she uncovered? And more importantly, why was she coming forward now? The woman who never stopped searching, Sheriff Janice, said, her voice steely and unwithering. "You should have done your job 30 years ago." Holloway's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Henry took a step closer. "Where did you find these?" Janice's sharp eyes flicked to him. "Where do you think?" She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small rusted key. Henry's stomach twisted. The storage unit, he realized. Janice nodded. "The one Ray Patterson kept all these years. I finally broke in 2 nights ago." She looked around at the gathering crowd, and I found things that should have never been hidden. Henry's mind spun. That unit had been packed with old furniture, tools, and junk. But what else was inside? He asked. Janice's fingers tightened around the key. "Proof," she whispered, "not just of what happened to my Melody and Tasha, but of what they were doing. And they weren't working along the way," she said. They sent Chase through Henry's spine. The Ledger of Darkness. Back inside the station, Janice spread out more files across Holloway's desk. The pages were yellowed with age, but the names were clear. Dates, locations, transactions. Henry frowned. These are payment records. Janice nodded. Ray Patterson didn't just take my daughter and her friend. He was part of a larger operation, and he was getting paid to do it. Henry's gut churned as he scanned the ledger. Amounts listed next to names, each one tied to a missing child. "This can't be real," Holloway muttered. Janice shot him a look. "You think I'd come back after all these years with something fake?" Holloway didn't answer. Henry's fingers traced down the page, and then he saw September 12th, 1991, the date Melody and Tasha vanished. Next to it, $10,000, paid in full. And beside that, initials WP. Henry's breath left him. Warren Pritchard hadn't just covered up the case, he had been in on it. Holloway cursed under his breath. If this is true, then we need to move. Henry interrupted, now, because something told him they weren't the only ones looking for this ledger. The ghosts of the past. The sun had begun to set by the time Henry pulled up to Warren Pritchard's old house. The former chief had died 2 years ago, but his son, Richard Pritchard, still lived there. Richard had once been a standout athlete, the kind of guy who smiled for the cameras and shook hands at fundraisers. But after his father's death, he had retreated into the shadows. Henry knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Henry's gut whispered something was wrong. So he did what any good cop would do. He broke in. The house smelled of dust and decay. Half-eaten food sat on the counter, and newspapers were piled to the ceiling. Then Henry saw it. A man's legs sprawled across the living room floor. His stomach twisted as he stepped closer. Richard Pritchard was dead. A message left in blood. His throat had been slit over. Open blood soaked into the carpet beneath him. Still fresh. Henry's heart pounding. Whoever had done this, they had been here recently. And then he saw it. Scrawled across the wall in Richard's own blood. Step digging. Henry's pulse spiked. Janice had only revealed the ledger a few hours ago. Someone was already trying to erase the past. And that meant whoever had been involved was still out there. Hunted. Henry was dialing Holloway's number when he heard it. A floorboard creaking upstairs. He wasn't alone. Henry's training kicked in fast. He drew his gun, moving silently toward the staircase. His ears strained for any sign of movement. Then a shadow shifted. At the top of the stairs, Henry spun, gun raised. Bang! A bullet tore through the air, splintering the wall inches from his head. Henry go for cover, returning fire. The figure moved fast, disappearing down the hallway. Someone was cleaning up loose ends, and now Henry was on the list. The vanishing hour. By the time Holloway and his deputies arrived, the house was empty. The killer had vanished. Richard's body was already growing cold. Henry rubbed a hand over his face. This wasn't random. They knew we were coming. Holloway nodded grimly. They're watching us. Janice stared at the bloody wall. They've been watching me for years. Her voice was haunted, but her eyes burned with determination. They killed Richard because he knew too much, she said. And if we don't stop them now, they'll do it again. Henry's stomach twisted. She was right. They weren't just dealing with a cold case anymore. They were dealing with a network, one that had been operating in Rockford for decades. And now the hunt was on. Shadows in the dark. The air in Rockford felt different, tighter, watched. Richard Pritchard's body was barely cold, yet Henry already felt the walls closing in. Someone had known he was coming. Someone had been waiting. And now they weren't just chasing the truth. The truth was chasing them. The unraveling. Back at the station, Holloway had the crime scene photos laid out. Across his desk, blood stains the message on the wall. The ledger Janice had risked everything to find. Henry stared at the initials beside each transaction. W.P. Warren Pritchard, former chief. R.P. Ray Patterson, respected businessman. And then one set of initials that made his stomach drop. And Holloway leaned in. You recognize that name, don't you? Henry did. Everybody in town did. Mayor William Carter, Janice's own husband. Henry's breath caught in his throat. This went deeper than anyone had imagined. A family secret. Janice sat across from them, her hands clasped together, fingers white with tension. When she saw the initials, her face didn't flinch, but her eyes did. Janice, Henry said carefully, tell me you didn't know. Silence. Janice closed her eyes for a moment, then exhaled. I suspected, she admitted, but I never had proof. Holloway shot Henry a glance. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because back then, nobody would believe me." Her voice was tired. "Holloway, William had power. He had connections. If I accused him without evidence, I'd be the one buried in the ground, not him." Henry's gut churned. The Master Days had been involved in trafficking children, and he had never been caught. Janice leaned forward. "But if his initials are here, that means there's more proof somewhere, and I think I go where to find it." Henry's breath stilled. "Where?" Janice lifted her gaze, cold and determined. "My old house. A house of lies." The Matters estate sat on the far edge of town, an old mansion built when Rockford was still young. It was the kind of house that screamed power. Tall iron gates, sprawling gardens, secrets buried beneath the floorboards. Henry had always seen it as a monument. Now, it looked like a graveyard. Janice led the way through the overgrown grass, moving like a woman on a mission. "He had a study," she said, "always kept it locked. When I tried to get inside, he'd get violent." Henry exchanged a look with Holloway. "Did you ever see what was inside?" Janice hesitated once. Henry's heart pounded, and Janice swallowed hard. There was a safe, and he had pictures of people he didn't want anyone to see. Henry's skin went cold. "We need to get in there," Holloway said. Janice nodded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a rusted key. "I never threw this away," she whispered. "I always knew I'd come back someday." Inside the lion's den. The inside of the house smelled like dust and old memories. Janice led them down a long hallway, past expensive paintings and forgotten relics of a life built on lies. They stopped in front of a thick wooden door at the end of the corridor. "This is it," she whispered. Henry reached for the key, but his instinct screamed at him to stop. He held up a hand. Wait, something felt off. The air was too still, like someone had been here recently. Henry pressed his ear to the door. Silence. Then a faint shuffle. Someone was inside. Henry pulled his gun. "Get back," he whispered. Janice's eyes widened, but she obeyed. Henry nodded to Holloway. Together they moved fast and hard. Bang! The door burst open. And then the world exploded. Fire and fury, an eruption of flames swallowed the room. Henry hit the ground hard, the heat searing his skin. The air filled with smoke and the smell of burning paper. The study was engulfed. Someone had rigged it to burn. Holloway coughed, stumbling to his feet. "Get out!" Henry grabbed Janice, dragging her through the hallway as fire licked their backs. By the time they stumbled onto the lawn, the entire study was a roaring inferno. Janice stared at the flames, her face pale. "They knew we were coming," she whispered. Henrik's chest tightened. This wasn't just about covering up the past. It was about sending a message. Stop now or die. A glimmer of hope. An hour later, after the fire department had extinguished the blaze, Henry sat on the curb, his mind racing. Everything inside that study was gone. The pictures, the safe, the evidence. Janice sat beside him, staring into the distance. "It's over," she muttered. "They burned everything." Henry exhaled. "Not everything?" Janice turned to him, confused. Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a single blackened notebook. Janice's eyes widened. "When I kicked in the door, I saw the safe was open," Henry explained. "I grabbed this before the fire spread." Janice's hands shook as she reached for it. The cover was charred, but the inside pages were mostly intact. And right there on the first page were names, lots of them. Some crossed out, some with dollar amounts beside them. At the very bottom, written in bold letters, was one name Henry never expected to see. Sheriff Rank. Holloway, the blood in Henry's veins turned to ice. Janice looked at him, eyes wide with realization. Holloway had gone inside the house before them. Had he known about the trap? Henry turned slowly. Holloway stood a few feet away, watching them carefully. Henry's grip tightened on the notebook. Janice whispered, "We've been trusting the wrong man." And for the first time in his career, Henry realized he wasn't sure who the enemy was anymore. The final betrayal, the night, was thick with the scent of burning wood and secrets. Henry's grip on the charred ledger tightened as he stared at the name scrolled at the bottom of the list. Sheriff Frank Holloway, the man who had stood beside him through thick and thin, the man who had pushed him to investigate the corruption, the man who had led him straight into the fire. Janice's breath hitched beside him. "Henry," she whispered, fear threading through her voice. He knew. Henry lifted his gaze. Holloway was standing just a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, watching, waiting. And for the first time, Henry wasn't sure if he was looking at his partner or his executioner. A reckoning in the ashes. The heat from the still smoldering house cast Holloway's face in shifting shadows. He took a slow step forward, his boots crunching against burnt debris. You really think on one of them?" he asked, voice calm. Henry didn't respond. He was too busy calculating his odds. Janice was unarmed. Holloway was too close to draw his gun without getting shot first. But was Holloway playing them, or had someone framed him? Henry held up the ledger, his fingers brushing over the ink-stained name. "Tell me, this isn't you." Holloway didn't even look at the book. Instead, he exhaled, rubbing a hand down on his face. "It's complicated." Janice let out a sharp laugh. "Complicated?" she spat. "Kids were trafficked, people were murdered, and your name is right there. What part of that is complicated?" Henry's jaw clenched. "Start talking, Holloway." The sheriff stared at them both, then let out a slow, tired sigh. "I wasn't part of it," he said, finally. "Not like you think." Henry's fingers twitched toward his holster. "I didn't sell kids," Holloway continued, "but I was on their payroll." Henry's stomach turned. "I took money to look the other way," Holloway admitted, voice filled with something dangerously close to regret. "Pritchard and the others, they had too much power, too much reach. They made it clear, either you played along or you disappeared." Henry's teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. "You let them get away with it." Ince's gaze darkened. "At first," he admitted, "but I started working against them from the inside. I leaked information, I kept records, and when I realized you were getting close, I pushed you toward the truth." Henry shook his head. "You led me to a burning house." Holloway's mouth tightened. "I didn't set that fire," he snapped. "I was trying to stop them from killing you." Janice took a step back, her eyes flicked in between them. "We're just supposed to trust you?" Now, Henrik's fingers flexed over the ledger. Holloway had led him this far, had helped him piece it together, had put his own name in Henry's hands. But was that guilt, or was it just a setup? "We don't have time for this," Holloway said, shaking his head. "You're in the open. They're coming." Henry frowned. "Who?" Holloway's gaze flicked past them, toward the tree line. "The ones who run this town." Then gunfire erupted, a town's dirty hands. The first bullet barely missed Henry's head. Janice screamed, ducking behind a burnout car, as clash shattered around them. Holloway cursed and returned fire. Henry hit the ground, scanning for the shooters. Shadows moved between the trees, black SUVs pulling up along the road. Men in dark clothing poured out, guns raped. "Get to the car," Holloway shouted. Henry grabbed Janice's arm and pulled her toward his truck. Bullets ripped through the air, slamming into the pavement beside them. A second SUV skidded to a stop, blocking the road ahead. They were being herded. Holloway emptied his clip, then threw Henry the keys. "Drive." Henry barely had time to slam his foot on the gas before another round of gunfire rang out. The truck lurched forward tires squealing as they sped toward the main road. Janice clutched the ledger to her chest, breath ragged. "They knew," she gasped. "They knew we were coming." Henry's grip tightened on the wheel. "They're trying to clean up their mess." Holloway reloaded in the passenger seat. "No," his voice was grim. "They're trying to clean up us." The final play. The roads blurred past in streaks of dark and light as Henry drove hard toward the only place left where they could turn the tide, the FBI field office. It was the only way to expose this, to make it too big to cover up. But the SUVs weren't letting them go. Headlights burned in the rearview mirror. They're gaining. Henry's mind raced. They wouldn't make it to the FBI without getting run off the road, which meant they had to make the hunters think they had already won. Henry's pulse hammered. "Hold on." He swerved the truck hard, yanking the wheel toward an abandoned bridge. The road dropped off into a deep ravine where a collapsed section of bridge left nothing but air between the two sides. The moment the truck hit the edge, Henry yanked the emergency brake and bailed. Janice and Holloway leaked out just as the truck tumbled into the ravine, exploding on impact. From the road above, the SUV skidded to a stop. Men climbed out, peering down into the smoke. Holloway: "Lay low in the grass. They think we're dead." Henry watched the men pull out their radios. He exhaled. Good. Janice still clutched the ledger. What now? Henry pulled out his phone, bloodied fingers dialing a number he never thought he'd use. The line picked up after one ring. "Agent Carter?" a voice answered. Henry swallowed hard. "This is Detective Henry Calloway," he said. "I have evidence of corruption, child trafficking, and multiple murders in Rockford, and I have names." The voice on the other end went still. "Then, where can we meet?" Henry exhaled. "We'll come to you." Janice squeezed his arm, relief and exhaustion in her eyes. Holloway watched the SUVs in the distance, his expression unreadable. Henry turned away. This wasn't over. Not yet. But the people who had tried to bury the truth, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because now the whole world was going to hear about it.